All right, so let's jump right into Canadian politics.
Okay.
Things are crazy up there right now.
Yeah.
Justin Trudeau resigning.
Big news.
Huge news. It seems like it came out of nowhere.
It did seem to come pretty suddenly.
Definitely caught a lot of people off guard, I think.
For sure.
I know, I was surprised.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to unpack what happened today.
Sounds good.
Using a couple of sources.
Yeah, okay.
We've got some articles from the Prime Minister of Canada's official website.
All right.
And then we also have a piece from AP News.
Okay.
And our goal is to kind of go beyond just like the headlines.
Right.
And really look into what led up to this, what might happen next, who are the players involved,
Right.
all that good stuff.
I'm excited.
So just a fun fact to start us off. Justin Trudeau was actually born on Christmas Day.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine
That's a lot of pressure.
all those birthday parties, combined with Christmas?
Every year.
But yeah.
Interesting.
So let's get into it. So one thing that struck me when I was reading through these articles, especially on the Prime Minister of Canada website, his bio, is that Trudeau was a teacher before he entered politics.
Oh, wow.
Which is not something you see every day.
No, not very often.
Right. Like a world leader, usually they come from, more like a business background.
Law or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Or politics, right? From a very early age.
Yeah. So I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, and you have to think that that background probably really informed,
Shaped his approach to things.
Exactly, yeah.
Maybe why he was so focused on some of the social programs.
Intentionally.
And, getting young people engaged in politics and stuff like that.
You would think so.
So it's interesting to have that background.
Yeah.
So we have this, teacher turned prime minister, right? He was pretty popular, at least for a while there.
Yeah, he seemed to be doing pretty well.
And then suddenly, boom, this AP News article drops and he's resigning.
Yeah.
After nearly a decade.
Unexpectedly, too.
Unexpectedly, too.
Unexpected, exactly.
They were saying there was a dip in support, though.
Yeah, they mentioned that.
And that Chrystia Freeland, his finance minister, had also left very suddenly.
Right, which is interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
So you have to wonder, what's the real story here?
What's going on behind the scenes?
Probably.
Because it does seem kind of sudden.
Yeah, and the timing is interesting, too.
Right, because there's a potential election coming up.
Yeah, and plus we can't ignore what's happening, south of the border.
Oh, yeah.
Trump's back in the White House.
Right.
And that changes things, especially for Canada.
For sure.
Huge implications for Canada.
Big time.
And we know that Trump's already making some moves, especially when it comes to trade.
Oh, yeah. What's he doing?
Well, this AP News article, it talks about how Trump's threatening to impose tariffs on Canadian goods.
Oh, interesting.
So, imagine you're the average Canadian, you go to the store, and suddenly all your favorite products are more expensive.
Oof, that's gotta hurt. Right, like your maple syrup, your hockey sticks, your poutine, all that good stuff.
All the essentials.
Suddenly costing you more just because of these political games.
And that's going to hit people hard, especially right now with everything going on.
Yeah, for sure.
People are already struggling.
Absolutely.
So that's not what they need.
No, not at all.
But, remember, for Trump, this is all about trade deficits and immigration, right? Those are his main concerns.
Right.
He wants to make America,
America first.
Yeah, exactly.
And he sees Canada as being part of the problem.
Right, because they are a big trading partner.
Absolutely.
And, there's a lot of back and forth between the two countries on that.
And this is where Freeland's departure gets really interesting.
How so?
Well, she was very outspoken against Trump and his policies.
Oh, that's right.
She wasn't afraid to push back, stand up for Canadian interests.
I see.
So you could argue that her strong stance might have actually contributed to some of the tension.
It's like a chess game, isn't it?
Yeah.
Every move has consequences.
Totally.
Things ripple out.
Absolutely.
Affecting the whole board.
So now Trudeau's out, right?
Yeah.
Leaves a big power vacuum.
Huge.
And AP News throws out a few possible successors.
Oh, yeah. Who are they talking about?
Well, there's Mark Carney.
I've heard of him.
He's like the economist, with the rock star reputation.
Yeah, the big name.
Yeah, then there's Freeland, potentially.
If she's willing to come back.
Right, if she wants to jump back into the ring.
Yeah.
And then there's Dominic LeBlanc.
Who's that?
He's the new finance minister.
Oh, okay.
Kind of a wild card. Not as well known.
We'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch.
It'll be a race for sure.
And to make things even more complicated,
okay,
AP News cites a poll showing that the Liberals are actually trailing behind the Conservatives.
Oh, what?
And they also bring up this thing called a no-confidence vote.
A no-confidence vote.
Which I'm sure some of our listeners might not be super familiar with.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone's a Canadian politics expert.
Exactly.
What does that even mean?
So basically, it's like a test of confidence in the current government.
Okay.
And if enough members of parliament vote against them, then the government collapses and it triggers a new election.
Oh, wow. So that could happen?
It could, yeah.
So a spring election could be on the horizon?
Potentially, yeah.
Wow. And with the Conservatives ahead in the polls.
Right, exactly.
That's a big deal.
That's a huge deal.
So who's the leader of the Conservatives right now?
Well, that would be Pierre Poilievre.
Pierre Poilievre. Okay.
He's been gaining a lot of traction.
What's his platform like?
He's got kind of a populist platform,
Okay.
focusing a lot on the cost of living crisis,
Yeah, makes sense.
which, is a big concern for a lot of Canadians right now.
For sure.
So his message is resonating with a lot of voters.
Yeah, I can see why.
So it'll be really interesting to see how this all plays out.
Mm.
Yeah, things are definitely heating up in Canadian politics.
Definitely a lot to keep an eye on.
For sure.
It's going to be an interesting year.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I'm ready for it.
me too.
Let's do it. So much happening, right?
Yeah, it's crazy how, one event can just...
Set off this whole chain reaction.
Exactly. Everything is connected. It really shows how...
Domestic politics and then what's happening globally.
Totally. And the economy too, right?
All tied together.
All these pressures all coming together.
And it makes you think it's not just about
Yeah.
who wins the election.
Right.
It's about what direction Canada's going to go in.
Exactly. Yeah. What kind of future are they choosing?
Okay, so we've been talking about the immediate fallout from Trudeau resigning.
Right.
But you mentioned something earlier that I
Yeah.
thought was really interesting.
Go.
This whole idea about a global shift in political thinking.
Oh, yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. It is. How does that play into...
Well, what's happening in Canada specifically?
You could argue that Trudeau kind of represented,
This liberal internationalist approach.
Exactly, yeah, and that's been losing ground.
For a while.
For a while now, yeah. And then with Trump back...
It's those forces, the populism...
The nationalism.
Are gaining momentum.
Yeah, big time. And you see it everywhere, not just
Europe.
Yeah, all over the globe.
So how does that then affect Canada's
Yeah.
place on the world stage?
Well, Canada has this reputation, right?
Yeah.
They're seen as the nice guys.
The peacekeepers.
Yeah, compassionate.
Yeah.
And that's been a good thing for them.
It's worked for them.
But if they elect someone who's, more aligned with Trump's ideology...
It could change things.
Yeah, it could really change things.
Like their relationships with other countries.
Their trade deals.
Wait, what do you mean?
Yeah, their whole brand, their national brand.
Interesting.
It's a lot at stake. So we talked about some potential contenders, right?
Yeah.
But realistically, looking at the polls,
Okay.
who has a shot?
Well, it's looking pretty good for the Conservatives right now.
They seem to have the lead.
They do. Poilievre's message is really resonating.
Yeah, with voters who are feeling the pinch.
Totally. People are worried about the cost of living.
Absolutely.
And his whole Canada First approach.
Yeah.
It appeals to a certain segment of the population.
But what about the other parties?
Yeah.
Do they stand a chance?
The New Democrats are having a tough time.
They are.
It's hard for them to gain any ground,
Yeah.
They might benefit if the right-wing vote gets split
Okay.
between the Conservatives and maybe another smaller party.
So it's possible.
But it's a long shot, I'd say.
And then there's the Bloc Québécois.
Ah, yes. The wild card.
Always keeping things interesting.
Yeah. What are they up to these days?
Well, they're really focused on the interests of Quebec.
Right. They're a regional party.
Yeah.
So they could end up holding a lot of power.
In a close election.
Yeah. But ultimately, they want more autonomy for Quebec.
Not necessarily to form the government.
Exactly. Their priorities are different.
So a lot of moving parts.
A lot to keep track of.
But it seems like the Conservatives have the advantage right now.
For sure.
So as we get closer to this potential election, what should we be paying attention to? What could really shake things up?
Well, I think the Liberals, how they choose their new leader.
Yeah.
That's huge. Do they go with someone who represents continuity?
Or someone totally new.
Exactly. A fresh perspective. That could make all the difference.
So they need to choose wisely.
They do. Very carefully.
What about the Conservatives? How do they maintain their lead?
I think it's about strategy,
Okay.
Do they play it safe? Stick to the message that's working?
Or try to appeal to more people?
Exactly. Broaden their base.
Tough choices.
It's a balancing act.
And of course, we can't forget about...
The Trump factor.
Right. He's already making waves.
Talking tariffs.
Yeah. How will that affect things?
Could his actions actually influence
Potentially, yeah.
The election.
If Trump keeps putting pressure on Canada.
With these trade threats.
It could actually help the Conservatives.
Really?
Yeah. Poilievre could say, look, I'm the strong leader Canada needs.
To stand up to Trump.
Exactly. I'll protect our interests.
But wouldn't that risk, like, alienating some voters?
Oh, for sure.
Who are worried about a trade war?
It's risky. It's a gamble.
Yeah.
He has to figure out how to appeal to both sides.
The ones who want to fight back against Trump, but also the ones who are worried about the economy.
Exactly. It's a tough line to walk.
It sounds like Trudeau was facing a lot of pressure.
Oh, yeah. From all sides.
So I can see why he might have stepped down.
I mean, it's got to be a hard job.
Yeah.
Especially now.
Being Prime Minister.
With all the uncertainty.
Yeah.
It's a lot to handle.
So let's recap for a sec.
For our listeners who maybe just tuned in, what's the takeaway from all of this?
Well, I think the main thing is Canada's at a crossroads right now.
They are.
The decisions they make in the next few months will shape their future, not just domestically, but globally too.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that politics isn't just some abstract thing, you know?
Right, it affects real people.
Real people's lives.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think it's important for everyone, not just Canadians, to pay attention to what's happening.
Absolutely. It's a microcosm of what's happening globally.
Yeah, totally agree.
It's fascinating.
This has given me a lot to think about. I don't know about you out there listening, but what are you finding most interesting in all of this? Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground.
Well, yeah.
Trudeau's resignation, who might replace him, all those global trends affecting Canada.
It's a lot.
It is, but for you listening, it all boils down to how these changes might actually impact your life.
Right, the real world stuff.
Exactly. So let's get into the nitty-gritty, the issues.
It's stuff that matter.
That are front and center in this potential election.
Okay, let's do.
So based on what we're seeing in this AP News article, the economy is a big one.
Yeah, definitely a top concern.
Costs are soaring. Inflation is hitting everyone's wallets.
It's a familiar story, unfortunately.
Sadly, it is.
A global issue for sure, but that doesn't make it any easier for Canadians.
No, especially those who are struggling to make ends meet.
Right. And this is where you see the different parties trying to offer solutions.
Each with their own approach.
Exactly. Different ideas about how to tackle it.
So let's break it down, starting with the Conservatives.
Okay.
Poilievre's their leader. How's he addressing these economic anxieties?
Well, his strategy seems to be blaming Trudeau's policies for the cost of living crisis.
Oh, okay.
So his solution is pretty classic, conservative: tax cuts, deregulation.
Get the government out of the way.
Exactly. Shrink the role of government in the economy.
But what about the people who need support, who rely on those social safety nets?
That's the big question, right?
It is.
The Conservatives argue that a strong economy will benefit everyone.
Right.
But critics worry that their policies might leave some people behind.
The vulnerable.
Exactly. And that's a key debate in this election, for sure.
So how about the Liberals? What's their plan?
Well, they're in a tricky spot, defending their record while also offering a way forward.
Yeah.
So they'll likely emphasize those social programs.
Saying they're crucial safety nets.
Exactly, especially during tough times.
Makes sense.
They might also highlight investments in key sectors, to create jobs, boost innovation.
So it's kind of a classic left versus right, isn't it?
It seems to be.
Stimulate the whole economy or target support to those in need.
Yeah, two different approaches.
What about the New Democrats? Where do they stand?
They're pushing for even more government intervention.
Okay.
More spending on social programs, affordable housing initiatives, and job creation, but focused on green energy, sustainable development.
So a pretty clear range of economic approaches for voters to consider.
Definitely options on the table.
But we can't forget the other big issue looming over all of this.
Oh, yeah.
Climate change.
Huge issue. And it's not just some abstract future threat anymore.
Right.
It's impacting Canadians right now. Extreme weather, rising sea levels.
It's real.
And the question is, how will Canada contribute to solving this global challenge?
And of course, we can't talk about climate change without mentioning Trump.
Oh, yeah, he's back
in the White House. And his stance on environmental issues is,
let's just say, not quite aligned with the rest of the world.
Putting it mildly.
Definitely adds another layer of complexity for Canada.
So how do they navigate that?
Well, the Liberals will probably try to distance themselves from Trump's policies.
Emphasizing their commitment to the Paris Agreement.
Right, and their investments in renewable energy.
But how do they balance that with the economic reality of having the U.S. as their biggest trading partner?
Especially if Trump's pushing policies that are bad for the environment.
It's a tough spot to be in.
It is. It's a tightrope walk for sure.
What about the Conservatives? How might they approach this?
They might try to position themselves as more pragmatic,
Okay,
focusing on balancing environmental concerns with economic growth.
makes sense.
They could argue that Canada can't afford to alienate the U.S.
So we've got the economy, climate change, anything else that might sway voters.
Well, healthcare is always a big one in Canada.
Of course.
The Liberals will likely focus on expanding access to services,
Okay.
while the Conservatives might lean towards more market-based solutions, giving people more choice.
Interesting.
Education is another area where you'll see different approaches.
Yeah.
Liberals potentially emphasizing public education, Conservatives maybe promoting school choice, charter schools.
It's fascinating how these debates, about the role of government
Individual choice versus collective responsibility.
play out in every country.
They really do. They're fundamental.
But ultimately, it's up to Canadian voters to decide what they want.
What vision for their country they support.
Exactly. So we've got this potential election, a new U.S. president shaking things up globally.
Lots of complex issues facing Canada.
What does it all mean? Where do we go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer.
No, there isn't.
But what we can do is stay informed, think critically, and talk about it.
Have those conversations.
Exactly. Engage in constructive dialogue.
I couldn't agree more. It's easy to get overwhelmed by all the noise.
It is. But it's important to remember that we all have a role to play,
In shaping the future.
whether it's in Canada, the U.S., or anywhere else in the world.
Well said. Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive.
It seems we have.
But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
We've talked about Trudeau's resignation as the end of an era,
Yeah,
but it's also a new beginning, right?
it is.
So what kind of leadership does Canada need now?
What values will guide them?
What kind of future do they want to create?
Those are the questions I hope every Canadian is asking themselves.
Because the answers will shape not just their country.
But our world.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you learned something new, gained a fresh perspective,
Yeah,
and maybe even feel inspired to learn more and get involved.
that's what we hope for.
Until next time, keep diving deep.